Hey there, Misfits. This is Kate.
And this is Kevin.
Welcome to Horrorwood. Just discussing school yearbook pictures.
Yearbook photos.
Which were a real vibe back in the day.
100%.
I mean, I guess they still are.
I was going to ask, are they still a big thing? Because like having your pictures taken was like a big deal. I
think they are. I mean, my nieces get their school pictures taken. And like, I know there's a lot of thought that goes into their outfits and how they're going to do their hair. Do you remember, because I don't think they do these anymore, but do you remember the mirrored pictures?
Yes.
Where you'd like
that's crazy.
Stand in the front of a mirror so that your reflection is also in the picture. Why was that a thing?
I don't know. I also think it's hilarious when like they would put like you'd have your face and then another version of your face would be up like on a different part of it, like in the clouds if it was like an outside. It's like, what the fuck?
Why? What a weird thing. You know what else is weird? It's July. Like,
that's crazy.
How did this happen?
2024 is halfway over.
Oh, golly, I can't even think about that.
Well, what I am looking forward to is Hallmark Christmas in July movies.
See, I can't have any Christmas things happening in July for myself.
I get it.
But I'm not there yet.
I completely understand. I totally hear you. I would absolutely say the same thing about myself. But there's a part of me that things are stressful right now.
Sure.
So
it's a comfort.
It's a comfort.
Absolutely.
And I'm still subscribed to Hallmark now. So I'm going to have to sit down and watch myself some Xmas.
Binge those suckers.
Also, I saw a TikTok where Michael's has put out all of their Halloween stuff already.
Now that interests me.
Mm-hmm. And the guy walks into the store and he's like, this is early, right? This is early. And it's like,
no.
Girl, no. Halloween's just coming up on the same status as Xmas. So like, what do y'all think?
It's pre.
July,
August, September. Pre.
Yeah.
Pre. It's 3 pre's.
Halloween.
Pre-October. Here we are. I'm excited for Halloween this year. And you know what else I'm excited for? That we have
a new Patronian.
Mandy. Thank you so much. She's our newest Misfit Murderino, and this is your shout out.
She is the hot shit. She is up here. It is hot girl or, guy or they, them summer.
There you go.
And get it, Mandy.
I love that we've never met this person, never seen a picture of them, but we know already.
We know they're fucking cool.
Obviously. They signed up on our Patronian page, Patreon.
A cool breeze and a hot summer.
Look at you.
I'm ready to be on the news. It's 74 degrees and it's chilly. I don't know.
where you're going there.
Apologies.
74 degrees and chilly. That doesn't make sense. Okay, we're off the rails.
Chilly.
We do have one more shout out. I went to a show at Second City a week and a half ago or so. Right. And within our group was a woman named EB, and I introduced myself to her, and she was like, "Hi, I'm your biggest fan. I listened to the podcast." I was like, "Oh my God,
amazing.
Thank you." So a shout out to EB because you totally made my night. She sends you her love.
Hi, EB.
And yeah, that was super exciting. So thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah. And speaking of listening, this episode was a listener suggestion.
Really?
I do believe. Here's the problem. I searched through the comments. I searched through our Instagram messages. I could not find who sent this to us.
Damn.
Maybe they sent it in an email, which I don't think I looked through those. So if you suggested this, shoot me an Instagram message or send us an email or something just so like we can shout you out because I hadn't heard about this case before. It is Cocoa Nuts. On Sunday, June 13th, 2004, 86-year-old Helen Colton went to the house of her longtime partner, 91-year-old Robert Lees, or Bob as she called him, a once prominent screenwriter. The two lived separately but on the same block in an upscale Hollywood neighborhood. The couple had plans that evening to attend a big annual awards event/party at the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. Sciences. Wow.
Hey, they're scientists.
Starting off great. And Helen arrived at his home around 4:00 p.m. to pick him up.
Mm-hmm.
But when she got there, she noticed his newspaper was still lying on the front porch. And she immediately knew something was wrong.
Uh-oh.
Bob always read the paper in the morning. It's how he started his day. And this is the Sunday paper. So, that's like the big papa of papers.
It's the hot shit paper of the week.
And it's well into the afternoon now. And he hasn't even so much. Okay, I was speaking like a human before we started this.
Kate, you and I were going back and forth.
We were on fire.
Making comments.
And then I hit record. Okay.
You got this.
And it's well into the afternoon now, and he hasn't even so much as brought the paper into the house. So Helen is feeling uneasy.
Okay.
She knows in her gut that this is not a good sign. When she made her way inside, there was an eerie calmness in the home. Helen made her way to Bob's bedroom, and there on the floor, she saw his pajama-covered legs sticking out from underneath some blankets, but the rest of him was covered. So right away, you might think, oh no, did he fall off the bed and break a hip? I mean, he's 91. How long has he been lying here?
Yeah, I used to make like forts out of comforters, like with chairs.
So maybe he made a fort. He didn't.
Damn it.
Helen knew Bob had probably passed. He wasn't moving. Yeah. He hasn't been outside at all, evidenced by the newspaper on the porch. And he's on his bedroom floor. It's not looking good. So she calls the police. The operator told her to check and see if he's still breathing. So she lifted the blankets off of him and couldn't believe what she saw.
Ooh.
Now, when you hear of a 91-year-old man lying motionless in his bedroom, it's a pretty safe bet that the cause of death is natural. But when a person dies of natural causes, generally their head is still attached to their body. Not only had he been decapitated, but his head was nowhere to be found.
Oh, no. This is like Headless Horseman type stuff. Yikes. Is Helen his, when you say partner, like romantic partner?
Romantic partner,
okay,
yes.
I thought maybe like business partner or...
Romantic.
Got it.
Robert Lees was born on July 10th, 1912 in San Francisco, California. So he was a Cancer. And as we'll see, he definitely embodies the characteristics of a Cancer. Loyal, protective of loved ones, not afraid to fight for what he believes in. And Cancers are also said to have an unusual ability of knowing things without knowing how they know them. Like they have a hunch about things that end up being true. And this is going to come back later. He was the youngest of 3 kids in a middle-class Jewish family. Most of his family members were Republicans, whereas he was a diehard Democrat. So he kind of became the black sheep of the family, at least according to a cousin of his that had written about him. Growing up, he acted in school plays, which sparked his interest in the entertainment industry. After graduating high school in 1929, Bob and his family relocated to Los Angeles and he enrolled in UCLA. Unfortunately, he wasn't there long because it's 1929. Thanks to the Great Depression, his college days ended as quickly as they began. He left during his freshman year because his family just couldn't afford it anymore. Sure. They'd once been well off. They were middle class. They hadn't struggled before.
I mean, imagine if they saw the prices today.
Eek.
Hup.
His dad ran his own business and things had been good, but now that's all changed. So his dad asked him to leave school and work in the office with him at his clothing business to try and keep it running. So Bob did that for a while, but as luck would have it, he got work as an extra in films thanks to the connection his family had to a producer at MGM. Just like a random
connection.
They had a friend there.
Very cool.
And so I think this producer was like, hey, I know times are tough. If Bob is looking for work, he can come to set and be in the background, which Bob happily agreed to do.
Oh, he would probably love it.
I don't think the clothing business was where it was at for him. Sure. He was like, put me in the movies. Remember, he had done some acting in school. He'd been in some school plays, so it was definitely something he was already interested in. His work as an extra led to him getting slightly bigger roles. He'd get small bit parts like as a bellboy in the 1932 film Grand Hotel, which actually won the Oscar for Best Picture that year. He got an audition for a dancer role in the film Dancing Lady, which starred Joan Crawford and Clark Gable, but he thought he was too short for the role. He was just under 5'10", and he thought, I've got to make myself taller. How do I make myself taller?
Platforms.
Well, he rolled up a bunch of toilet paper and stuffed it into his shoes. And he walks in and is like, I'm ready. But now his shoes don't fit properly because there's a bunch of toilet paper stuffed in there.
And he can't dance.
He could dance.
Oh, he could dance.
So he starts the dance routine but one of his shoes goes flying off his foot, and the toilet paper just falls out like a giant streamer, like you would decorate with at a party.
Oh my God, that's so embarrassing. It reminds me of that episode of Golden Girls where Blanche is auditioning to be in a community theater production.
I remember
with
this.
Famous person, and she wears like an air bra.
I remember
And like
this.
she goes to hug the guy, and like they pop, and you just hear like the.
So Bob was like, whoops.
Oopsie.
But the film's dance director liked his spirit and gave him a part as a chorus boy.
Great.
Although his roles were very small, MGM was impressed by him. And they said, hey, kid, you might have what it takes to be a star. So they offered him a screen test. They said, bring a scene or a monologue that you want to perform. Enough with these small bit parts. Like, let's see how you can do with some actual lines.
Sure.
But Bob wasn't satisfied with the scenes that were available, so he wrote his own.
Wow.
He showed up for his screen test and performed all his own material. And it was good.
They liked it.
MGM loved it.
Oh, well, that's ballsy.
Yeah. They said, listen, Bob, as an actor, I don't know. We're not so sure about you. But as a writer,
hey,
you've got it. How would you like to join our new junior writers department? And of course, Bob was not about to pass up what was clearly an incredible opportunity. So he said, sign me up. Comedy was Bob's strong suit. He once said, quote, I guess I was a comedy writer from the word go. Another young writer in the department was Frederick Rinaldo, who had moved to Los Angeles from New York, and Bob and Frederick quickly became collaborators. The junior writers department only lasted a couple of years, but even after it disbanded, Bob and Frederick continued working together and joined MGM's short subjects department. Throughout the 1930s, they wrote several short films, including Profit Without Honor, which was Oscar nominated for Best Short Subject.
Whoa.
Also during the 1930s, Bob found love.
Ooh-wee.
This was before Helen, who I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. Bob met Jean Abel, and in 1939, the two were married. I hated the way I said that.
I loved it. Married.
I don't know why that came out that way. They went on to have 2 kids, a daughter, followed by a son, and they remained together until her death in 1982 from colon cancer.
Oh, no.
But they had a long life together.
Yeah, I was going to say that's sad, but also, like, congrats on a, long and flourishing marriage.
Exactly. So by 1940, Bob's personal life is going well, he's a newlywed, and his career is taking off. That year, he and Frederick wrote their first feature-length screenplay called Street of Memories, which was done at 20th Century Fox. And the following year, they were signed by Universal Pictures.
Dang.
And this is when things really started to pop off for them.
Okay.
Because it was at Universal that they started writing for Abbott and Costello.
Oh, fuck.
They wrote several films for the comedy duo. Their most recognizable is probably Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, I thought for sure you would have seen it.
I haven't seen it.
Some argue it is the best horror comedy of all time.
I'm a bad horror fan. Yikes.
Not true. You're still like
in
the
this
number
moment. In this moment.
I was going to say you're still the number one horror fan that I know of.
Wonderful.
Bob and Frederick made a great team. They worked well together, but could also be really goofy. So like a lot of times they'd have to go to these meetings at studios and wait forever in the waiting room to talk to the producer, whoever it was, and pitch their project.
Right.
So while they were waiting, one of the things that they would do is they'd go up to the receptionist and be like, can we have all of your paper clips and a piece of paper? So the receptionist would be like, okay, here. And they would make like a net. Like they would they would connect all of the paper clips as like a little net, and then they'd wad up the piece of paper into a ball.
Basketball.
Well, they made it like a little hand mitten. Like instead of badminton. And so they would do this in the waiting room when there's all these other people. So they were just like entertaining people and playing games. And like that was just his personality.
That sounds like fun.
Throughout the 1940s, his work was all in film. And by the end of the decade, his career was at its height. He was one of the founding members of the Screenwriters Guild of America, which would later become the Writers Guild. He was making what today would be the equivalent of about $13,000 a week.
Hot damn.
Yeah. He drove a convertible. He had a live-in staff of 3. Like, He was doing pretty good.
Okay, so he climbed up that ladder.
Sure did. And that staff that he had hired was a Japanese-American family that had been imprisoned at Manzanar, which was one of the internment camps during World War II. Bob and his wife Jean literally hired them off the street after the war and were like, hey, we can give you jobs and a place to live. We can help you out.
Damn. Well, I mean, I say damn because he sounds like a genuinely good person.
He was, exactly.
I love when we hear these stories about, like, I don't love that we hear the story of whatever happened to this guy. Of
course.
But it's nice to hear, like, even back then, you know, in this industry, there's some good.
Yes. He was, as we'll see throughout this episode, he was all about striving for fairness and equality. And trying to help people out, basically.
Good on Bob.
In all this, he's still just in his 30s at this point. Driving his convertible, making bank. So he's feeling great. He's got a beautiful family. His career is hot. He's become a recognizable personality around LA. People often described him as, quote, the funny short guy. He's got a great working relationship with Frederick. And then it all came crashing down.
No, what happened?
McCarthyism happened.
The Red Scare.
Well, the second Red Scare.
The second Red Scare.
It was sweeping through Hollywood. So here's just a little Horrorwood history. We've discussed McCarthyism in other episodes, so here's a brief recap. McCarthyism was a fear-based political movement that accused left-wing American citizens of being communist, associating with communist and or supporting communist ideals. Accusers often had zero evidence to back up their claims, but that didn't matter. It had a huge impact on Hollywood for a couple of reasons. One, a majority of artists lean in a more progressive, liberal way of thinking, which was exactly what supporters of McCarthyism were scared of. And two, Hollywood is full of prominent figures. And because this movement was all about fear-based control, what better way than to accuse high-profile celebrities of being communist and ruining their lives and careers to show the American people, hey, this is what will happen to you if you don't believe what I believe and do as I say. And it was William Wilkerson, the founder and publisher of The Hollywood Reporter. If you've listened to the Comedy Store episode, he published that list in his paper naming people who had pissed him off as communist sympathizers. If you remember, he was all butthurt because he wanted to own his own studio, but the studio bigwigs wouldn't support him, so in retaliation, he decided to get back at them by destroying their creative talent. And he started naming those people, the actors, the writers, the directors, as communists.
What a little bitch.
He was a little bitch. And it was his list that really got McCarthyism rolling in Hollywood. Like, that really set it off. It didn't just affect Hollywood, though. McCarthyism was everywhere. Schools, government agencies, everywhere. If you supported labor unions, you were a communist. If you were a civil rights activist, you were a communist. If you were gay, you were a communist. You're a communist, Kevin.
Oh, look at me, a big old commie just sitting right across from you. We all should deserve equity.
So many well-known creative people were accused of being communists and were blacklisted, and some were even imprisoned during this time. Lucille Ball, Lena Horne, Charlie Chaplin, Albert Einstein, Arthur Miller, all of them were blacklisted. Many because they refused to name names of others suspected of being communist. Because that was the game. The House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, would accuse someone and then say, we'll let you off the hook and you can keep your job if you give us some names of other people we can accuse. Christ. And there were plenty of people willing to turn on their friends in order to save their own careers, along with people who named names of those who they simply just didn't like. Walt Disney, for example, was a big old conservative right-winger who was pissed off that some of his employees had gone on strike at his studio.
We talked about that.
Yeah, so he said, oh, they're all communist, when really they were striking because he was just horrible to them. By naming them before the HUAC, he ruined the lives and careers of multiple people because they didn't want to go along with each and every little thing he wanted. He also ignored his wife, was anti-Semitic, and a big old racist, but that's...
We know.
Go listen to that episode.
Go listen to the Disney episode. Also, it's just like, when this comes up over and over again, it's like, so this is, especially when we're talking, like, back then, McCarthyism, right-wingers, conservative parties, all of that, like, someone just mentions equitable treatment of people, and people are like, no! communist.
Exactly.
It's like, what the fuck is wrong with you, you stupid little babies?
Ronald Reagan was another one who had no qualms about naming names, as was director Elia Kazan, who ruined the lives and careers of several of his friends by naming them before the HUAC.
Elia Kazan, that...
Streetcar Named Desire.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah. And one of those friends was his good buddy, playwright Arthur Miller. After confronting Kazan about his testimony, Miller wrote The Crucible as an allegory for McCarthyism.
Yes, I love that play.
Elia Kazan, in addition to A Streetcar Named Desire, also directed East of Eden and On the Waterfront. And I didn't know this until I began researching this episode. On the Waterfront was Kazan's outlet to defend himself for naming names. The film, which came out a year after The Crucible, is about a longshoreman who testifies against corrupt union bosses. And it was Kazan's way of being like, I did the right thing naming names. Those people are corrupt, blah, blah, blah. Miller and Kazan had actually developed a screenplay together about the New York docks, which was never produced, and Kazan expounded on that idea to make On the Waterfront.
Oh, I see.
The film went on to win 8 Academy Awards, including one for Best Director. After he named Miller, the friendship between the two kind of went south.
I would say, I mean, like, they had this idea together, right?
And yeah, I mean, it wasn't the On the Waterfront idea, but it was kind of where they birthed
similar,
it.
Yeah.
And Miller actually wrote A View from the Bridge in direct response to On the Waterfront.
I did not know this.
That's what I didn't know that either. Miller's play is about a longshoreman who sells out his friends out of greed and jealousy.
Well, no shit.
Miller sent the play to Kazan, and Kazan kind of jokingly asked if he could direct the movie version. And Miller responded, quote, I only sent you the script to let you know what I think of stool pigeons.
Oh, burn. Arthur Miller is a boss bitch.
I mean, he was horrible to Marilyn Monroe, but like, that's another story.
I know. It's all everybody's awful in their own way.
Yep, we all are. Kazan's actions and the Academy's response would have a deep impact on Bob Lee's, and we'll get into that in a bit.
I need to go watch those movies now.
Do it right now. Here, I'll wait.
Okay, we're going to be right back. I'm just going to go watch those 2 movies real quick.
Those who actually had a conscience and a soul refused to give the names of their friends and colleagues to the HUAC, and Bob Lee's was one of these people. After the Depression, Bob and Jean began opening their home as a gathering place where people could come and discuss social issues and work toward progressive causes. Mm-hmm. Like, how can we ensure people don't go hungry? How can we provide housing to the homeless? It was actually at a party hosted by the Lees just after World War II that Helen Colton first met Bob. There was nothing romantic between them at that time. She was married, he was married. She had just moved to LA and was working for the New York Times as their Hollywood entertainment correspondent.
What a fun job.
She is a bad bitch.
Really?
So we're going to talk about her later.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
Wow.
Bring me an HBIC from the time.
An HBIC?
Head bitch in charge.
I was like, what could that possibly stand for? She hung out with the liberal Hollywood crowd, and as McCarthyism took hold of the industry, she supported those being blacklisted. She's really fascinating. In 1951, someone, or someones, named Bob as a communist. I've read of 2 different people that named him. One was an actor, one was a director. It could have been both of them. They named him to spare themselves. So Bob was forced to travel across the country by bus to appear before the HUAC in Washington, D.C. They wanted him to name names, specifically that of his longtime writing partner, Frederick Rinaldo. But there was a clause with the procedure that a person couldn't denounce someone unless they mentioned that person's name. So the HUAC wanted him to throw Frederick under the bus, but in order to do so, Bob would have to say his name. So the questioning went like this.
Oh, I'm excited.
Judge, do you know Rinaldo? Bob. Who? Judge, your partner. Bob. I know my partner, yes. Judge. And his name is? Bob. I believe that is public information, sir. Judge. And his name? Bob. The one next to mine on the script. This goes on and on.
I'm obsessed. This sneaky little fabulous person.
He's loyal to the nth degree.
Loopholes.
Bob wasn't giving anything up. So, of course, he was blacklisted.
Yeah.
And the HUAC ended up blacklisting Frederick as well. The careers of both men came to an abrupt end, and they never worked together again.
Oh, no.
Frederick got a job as a salesman for a wholesale paper company, like a real-life Jim Halpert. He only wrote occasionally after that, but never worked in film again.
Oh, that makes me sad.
This is what was happening to hundreds of people
in the industry.
Careers immediately over. Bob's writing assignments also came to a screeching halt, of course, and his family suffered some pretty scary consequences as well. Someone set a fire in the front yard of the Lees' home, burning it in the shape of a swastika.
Okay, come on.
Like as though they were branding Bob as a Nazi. And his kids were getting harassed at school, sometimes by their own teachers.
What the fuck is wrong with people?
Exactly.
A lack of critical thinking and understanding. I'm going to take a drink of coffee.
Okay, me too. I mean, water for me.
Remember when you and I went to Winnetka for that fabulous Home Alone trip?
Of course.
I've still been thinking about that. Is it Affogato, I think?
Affogato? Yeah.
I'm still thinking about that.
Wow, that really made an impression on you.
It did, and we didn't even get one. I saw the picture and I was like, well, shit.
Oh my God. So it was when the kids started receiving harassment that Bob and Jean were like, it's time to leave LA.
Yeah, I'd say.
And this was common among those that were blacklisted. It was no longer safe for them to stay in Los Angeles, so they left. The Lees had a family connection in Tucson, Arizona, so they moved there, where Bob got a job as a maitre d' at a hotel restaurant called the Hotel Westerner, making significantly less money than he had as a successful screenwriter, of course. But even in Tucson, the family lived in fear. They were constantly looking over their shoulder, worried that the FBI might show up at their doorstep any minute and serve Bob with another subpoena. The kids weren't allowed to talk about their Hollywood life at all or about what their dad did. They were basically prisoners in their own home.
That's bananas.
So after a year, they decided to head back to LA. They were like, well, we can't run away because we're going to be living in fear regardless, so might as well go back to the place we know.
Just be in it, yeah.
Back in LA, Bob and Jean opened a string of small retail shops specializing in clothes and travel. Similar to what his dad did. His dad had that clothing business.
When you say clothing business, is that like sales, like selling clothes, or was it like...
I think it was selling clothes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or was it like alterations and stuff?
I'm not sure because all it said was clothing business.
Totally fine. Just curious. No worries.
They were able to make ends meet, but it was nothing like the life they had before.
Right. I mean, he was making bank.
Oh, yeah. Before, they didn't have to worry about money, but now, like, they've got to really budget and watch their spending. And although later Bob would say that being, quote, forced into the real world helped him grow as a person, it bothered him that he couldn't provide his family with the life he wanted them to have.
Yeah, I get that.
He also had a lot of anger about being blacklisted. He felt betrayed by his colleagues. And the pain he felt from that stayed with him his entire life. And unfortunately, he did contemplate suicide.
No.
He'd even planned out how he was going to do it. He was going to drive to the beach, put on some music, and put a hose in the car.
Shit.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
The only thing that stopped him was he couldn't bear the thought of leaving his family.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to do that to his wife and kids. While he struggled to make ends meet, he actually went to school to get his credential as a nursery school teacher.
What?
He was the only male in the class.
You better stop it with this story. What?
Even after McCarthyism ended, it wasn't like everyone who had been blacklisted could just return to their former careers. There was still a lot of distrust.
There you go.
Struggles.
Beat drop.
There was still a lot of distrust within the industry because people had turned on their friends. And there was still a stigma that followed those who'd been blacklisted.
Right.
Studios wouldn't even credit writers for their work. They would list a different name as the writer of their films. During the blacklist era, they'd ousted most of the writers. So studios would take screenplays that were already written but hadn't been produced yet and just put a different writer's name on it.
Fuck that shit.
This happened to Bob and Frederick. They had written a screenplay for Paramount about 10 years prior to being blacklisted, but it just kind of sat on the shelf for a long time. Nothing had really happened with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Paramount was like, we need a good script for Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. Oh, here's one. So they decided to make that film that Bob and Frederick had written, which was titled Jumping Jacks, but left Bob and Frederick's name off of it. The Screenwriters Guild forced Paramount to put their names back on the credits, So Paramount took out a huge-ass ad in the papers saying they only restored their names because they were being forced to, and it was against their wishes.
What the fuck? Like, would anyone reading that side with the studio, or would plenty of people?
Plenty.
Okay.
It was such a
divisive time.
Look at where we are now. You know what I mean? Like, there's gonna be people on this side and people on this side, and that's just how it was and is. And that kind of thing was happening a lot. It would be decades before the Writers Guild voted to correct the writing credits on all those films made during the Blacklist era. 1997.
Are you fucking serious? Mm-hmm. Did they finally do all of them? Did they go back or try to get as many as they could?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bob never worked in film again. However,
oh fuck.
Television was becoming increasingly popular in the late 50s and 60s, and TV shows need writers.
Yeah, they do. More than ever.
Bob began writing under different pseudonyms, his favorite being the name J.E. Selby, which was the name of an uncle of his that he was really close to.
I always wanted to go by... I always liked my middle name, which is Todd.
Yeah.
And like a different pronunciation of my last name.
Corbet.
Like Corbet. Todd Corbet. Isn't that great?
It's like Stephen Colbert.
Yes.
Bob would go on to write for several TV shows, including Lassie, Rawhide, Gilligan's Island, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Flipper, and The Adventures of Robin Hood, which was actually a series created for the purpose of hiring blacklisted screenwriters.
Wow.
It was all very scandalous at the time.
I love it. I wonder if Bob showed any eggs to Hitchcock.
That's a callback.
Callback.
In 1982, Bob's wife, Jean, died of colon cancer.
Fuck.
But Bob wasn't one to mope around. He was 70 years old, and he still had a lot of life to live. He liked to go out and dine at restaurants and dance, presumably without toilet paper stuffed in his shoes. He thought to himself, I think I'll take a folk dancing class. Folk dancing should still be around.
So, listeners, can I announce that I am taking an Irish dance beginners class at a folk music school.
And I'll be attending your concert.
My recital.
Your recital. I'm so excited for it.
It hurts so bad, and I can barely stand up, but I love it.
It's worth it. Guess who also decided to take up folk dancing?
Bob.
Okay, Bob's already in the folk dancing class.
Oh, Helen.
Helen Colton.
Helen Colton.
Helen Colton was divorced at this point, and she and Bob developed a friendship that turned into a romance. So I'm going to talk about Helen here for a minute, because she deserves all the flowers. Helen was the third of 6 kids. She was born in 1918. She graduated as the valedictorian of her high school, but her family didn't have much money, so she wasn't able to attend college. However, she loved to learn. And you can get a pretty decent education just by being curious about the world. If you enjoy finding things out and learning new skills, that's gonna take you far.
Yeah, or you can just ask someone who's in college for their reading lists.
There you go. Resources.
Books are around, y'all.
Helen taught herself how to become a great writer, which eventually landed her the job as the Hollywood correspondent for the New York Times.
Right.
She was married to a man named Martin Field, and in 1946, the two moved to Los Angeles for her work. They had 2 kids together, a daughter and a son, and as I said earlier, got involved with liberal Hollywood groups. She was a big ol' supporter of blacklisted workers in the entertainment industry.
When you said blacklisted, I thought you were going to say Black Lives Matter. At different times,
but
I know.
But she probably would have been.
She would have been absolutely. I was like, what? Where's this going? Ooh.
In 1965, she and Martin divorced. Mm-hmm. And she was like, oh, I kind of like this whole single lady thing. Like, this might just be where it's at.
Now put your hands up.
Uh-oh, uh-oh.
Up in the club.
And it was after her divorce that her career really took off. She became a pioneer in research on women's rights. She specialized in human sexuality and sex education. She earned her California teaching credential in family relations, wrote several books and hundreds of articles on women's rights and sex education, and was active in the ACLU and anti-war protests. In 1974, Helen appeared on The Dinah Shore Show, which was a popular nationally televised show on NBC, to discuss her book, Sex After the Sexual Revolution. There was a panel of women there to ask Helen questions, and one woman asked, I'm a widow who still gets sexual urges, but I have no male companion. What can I do? And Helen said, masturbation. However, unbeknownst to Helen and the others in the studio, The program had cut away during the questioning to a special report about Henry Kissinger's visit to the Paris peace talks. And when the network returned to the show, they did so just in time to hear Helen say, masturbation.
Perfect.
So you go from this serious news briefing about these peace talks and then masturbation.
I bet people had a fucking heart attack.
Lost their shit. Helen said there was no context. Coffee cups dropped. People were horrified. According to a conversation Helen had with Scott Michaels of the Dearly Departed tours, she was the first person to say that word on national television.
Did she get fined?
I don't think she got fined. NBC did cut the rest of the program.
Okay, fair enough. What a world.
What a world. Years later, Dinah Shore said that of all her episodes, that one was the one she was proudest of.
Oh, good. I don't know who Dinah Shore is.
She was a singer back in the day.
Okay. I like that her name almost sounds like dinosaur.
So you can hold on to that.
Thanks.
After her divorce, Helen was anti-marriage. She wrote an article arguing that, quote, marriage was for the benefit of society, not for the benefit of the individual.
Helen.
Which is why, though they were a couple for nearly a quarter of a century, Helen and Bob never married.
Okay. I love it. I love her. I love this. I love them.
Yes.
I love him.
You're here for it. We're all here for it.
We're here for them.
They didn't live together either. Helen liked her independence, but they did live on the same block, so she was practically right across the street from him. They did a lot of traveling together, and she said that once people found out the things he'd written, they couldn't believe it. She said, quote, people from all over were impressed that he wrote for Abbott and Costello. I wasn't, but people were.
Helen's keeping it real. She's keeping everybody grounded.
I think she also just thought of that, like, that's his job, because she was also a writer. Right. So to her, it wasn't
It's not a big deal to her.
Yeah, it wasn't like a big impressive thing. But I just love that she was like, people were impressed.
People liked it.
I wasn't. But people were. The couple enjoyed taking walks together arm in arm through the neighborhood. He could often be seen wearing blue jeans, a cardigan sweater over a sports shirt, and a cap. That was his go-to outfit. And people said he always carried himself with dignity. The two of them regularly ate at this one particular coffee shop in Santa Monica, but they were both pretty light eaters, so they would order one meal to split. But Bob always tipped the waiter on the cost of two meals because he thought that that was more fair. Like, he was just like, just because we're light eaters doesn't mean his tip should suffer, which that right there shows you who Bob was. Mm-hmm. Both Helen and Bob shared the same values. They believed in fairness and equality and generosity and helping out others. Bob had a plaque in his home that he'd had since he was a child that read, quote, the world is my home, all men are my brothers. And Helen said that's truly how he lived his life.
Good.
In the 1980s, he was the landlord of an apartment building, so he stopped by every month to collect the rent. And one of the tenants, a guy named Lauren Cantor, was a struggling screenwriter. And once Bob found out that he was a writer, he made sure to ask Lauren about his writing every time he stopped by. And he'd give him advice like, don't think too much, it kills creativity. Like, he wanted to help him out. Several years later, Lauren happened to run into Bob at an ice cream shop in Hollywood called Moshji Malone's. And Lauren was like, Mr. Lees, it's been so long. But by this point, Bob was in his late 80s and didn't remember his former tenants. Oh. And he felt so bad about it that he insisted on buying Lauren a pint of pistachio ice cream and told him, you've got to have it. It's the best in the city.
I can't love this man anymore. Pistachio ice cream is literally top tier.
Doesn't he just sound like the absolute most adorable man?
I once won a spelling bee by spelling the word pistachio.
How old were you? That's a pretty tough word for a kid.
I was in 7th grade.
Okay.
And one of my teachers after that made me pistachio cookies.
Yum. People said Bob was a dream neighbor. He's the kind of guy you wanted living next to you. He told his neighbors, hey, if you need any tools, just go in the shed and take them. He was very trusting of people, often leaving the doors to his home and car unlocked. Not good. Both he and Helen stayed very active throughout their lives. They liked to dine out at restaurants. He still drove his car, which had a bumper sticker on the back that read, war is not the answer. And in 1999, he played a prominent role in protesting the Academy's decision to award Elia Kazan an honorary Oscar for his long and successful career.
Yeah, fuck that bitch.
There was so much controversy regarding the award because Elia Kazan defended his decision to name names before the House Un-American Activities Committee, despite causing irrevocable harm to the lives and careers of his friends and colleagues. I shouldn't say a lot, but there were some who years later admitted that they made the wrong choice, that they had sold out, that they should never have done that. Kazan was not one of them.
Okay. Well, it's one thing to take accountability for your actions. You still did a fucking shitty ass thing.
True.
But
then to not even
say he did something wrong.
Kazan wrote in his memoir that if given the chance, he'd do it all over again.
What a POS.
He had no remorse for what he did. And now the Academy was honoring him for his life's work, which he only got that work because he threw all his friends under the bus. Protests were held outside the ceremony, and Bob was one of the protesters, and many of the attendees inside refused to stand or even applaud when Kazan went on stage to receive his award. Bob had a lot of disdain for the Academy. However, he and Helen remained active in the Academy's events for the sole purpose of fostering young talent. The Academy has programs that nurture the careers of emerging artists, particularly college-aged, who are soon to be out in the real world. And each year, there was a big annual gala/awards night for the students in the program. Young filmmakers from all over would attend. And in 2004, that party was held on Sunday, June 13th. Helen began that morning by doing what she always did. She walked over to Bob's front porch, picked up his newspaper and took out the sections she wanted, and then left the rest for him.
Nice.
Knowing once he got up, he'd bring the paper in. She went about her day. She called Bob a couple of times, but he didn't answer. That didn't really concern her, though, because at 91 years old, he was pretty hard of hearing, so he often didn't know that the phone was ringing.
Fair enough.
She spent the afternoon getting ready for the awards party that she and Bob planned to attend at the Academy that evening. She had her hair done, did her makeup, got all dressed up, and she was ready a little early. So she thought, I'll just go on over to Bob's until it's time for us to leave for the event. It was around 4 p.m. when she walked across the street looking elegant as always, but as she approached his house, she noticed the newspaper was still lying on the porch. She began to shake.
Oh, no.
She tried the front door, which was locked. So she went around back to a glass door that connected to the master bedroom, and it was ajar.
Oh, I don't like this.
That's when Helen walked in and saw Bob's legs sticking out from underneath the blankets on the floor. And when she peeled those blankets back, she made the unfathomable discovery that Bob had been beheaded. It didn't take police long to get there because they were already in the neighborhood, investigating another murder in a house just behind Bob's. 69-year-old, semi-retired Dr. Morley Ingleson had been home alone that morning. His wife, Valerie, had left earlier to pick up some relatives that were in town.
Okay.
Morley was an LA native. He attended Fairfax High School, where he ran track and was captain of the football team. He then went on to attend UC Berkeley and USC's medical school and practiced medicine in Beverly Hills and Los Angeles for more than 30 years.
Shit.
He later returned to USC's medical school, where he taught bedside manner.
Bedside manner?
I didn't even know that was a thing that was a class you took.
That's amazing.
He and Valerie loved to travel, which they were able to do more of now that he was mostly retired. He was a big fan of jazz music and had even learned to play the piano in recent years. Valerie described her husband as elegant, charming, and kind to everyone. On the morning of Sunday, June 13th, 2004, Morley was on the phone with a Southwest Airlines agent booking a flight to San Jose for a business trip. During the call, the Southwest employee suddenly heard the doctor scream, help me, somebody help me. And then the line went quiet.
Oh my God, that's eerie.
The agent then called another number at the home, and a man, who was not Morley, answered and simply said, everything is fine now.
Ew.
The supervisor for Southwest Airlines immediately called the police.
Good.
And when they arrived at Morley's home, they said it was one of the grisliest crime scenes they'd ever seen.
Oh, what happened?
Morley had been stabbed repeatedly with one of his own kitchen knives, and his throat had been slit. He'd also been attacked with his fireplace poker.
Oh, no.
Which was sticking out of his throat when police arrived. Like sticking up from the front of his neck. His chest had been cut open and some of his organs had been removed.
No.
Including his heart.
No.
and his penis had been cut off and was shoved into his mouth.
What? Okay.
Sorry, that was a
break.
lot.
Take a second.
I'm going to have some water.
You are fucking kidding me. That sounds like a rage killing.
It's very animalistic. The killer then left the home, locking the door behind him, and took off in Morley's Mercedes. The car was later found abandoned several miles away outside of the building where the killer was staying. And in a nearby dumpster, he had thrown out his shoes, presumably because they were covered in blood. As police searched Morley Ingelson's house, they found the severed head of Bob Lees, though they didn't know it was Lees at the time because they weren't aware of that murder yet. His head was sitting on top of the Ingelsons' neatly made, solid white bed and was covered in blood. One of the eyes was gouged out, and there was a belt wrapped around his head with a star belt buckle in his mouth. When Helen called the cops and told them Bob had been beheaded, they were like, well, that answers the question of who the severed head belongs to. And they were able to start piecing together the order of events. Inside Bob's bedroom, the clock he kept on his nightstand had been pulled out from the socket, and the time was stopped at 5:13 a.m. So they believe it was around that time that he was killed.
Okay.
Police said he fought back hard. Like he had been in bed asleep and woken up to being attacked.
Him. Oh, that's my worst nightmare.
He fought as hard as he could for being 91 years old.
Yeah.
I think he probably tried to use the clock as a weapon. Like, I think that's how it got pulled out. Yeah. Bob's attacker sexually assaulted him and used one of Bob's own metal bookends. He had these like really heavy iron bookends, and the attacker used one to beat Bob over the head. Police say this is what killed him. So he was dead before he was beheaded,
okay.
Which is some relief, I guess.
I mean, it's all pretty fucking terrible.
After beating Bob with the bookend, the attacker then took a meat cleaver out of a kitchen drawer and cut off his head, also removing some of his organs. He hung around the house for a while, it seems, and attempted to clean himself up. And then he decided he wasn't done killing. So he found a belt and tied it around Bob's head and then slung it over his shoulder like a purse and exited through the back door, scaled a fence behind Bob's house, and went into Morley's house. I can't even begin to think what that doctor's last moments, well, what both of those men's last moments were, but to just be sitting on the telephone booking a flight, and in walks a stranger carrying a severed head. My God.
Oh, my God.
And the Ingelsons knew Bob, so it makes me wonder if Morley recognized who the head belonged to when the guy came in. I don't know. Police couldn't figure out a motive for why these killings had taken place. This was an upscale neighborhood where the wildest thing that had happened was Hugh Grant was caught with a sex worker in his car. Like, it was in this neighborhood.
Okay.
Oh, that thing. That was like the craziest thing that had happened there.
Okay.
There might be an occasional burglary, but people never suspected something as gruesome as this could ever happen. Everyone was on high alert. Sally Struthers lived nearby and was completely freaked out.
Okay, it's funny you mentioned Sally
Do you
Struthers.
have a Sally Struthers story?
I went to see her in Pittsburgh.
Oh.
Because she was in the touring show of The Full Monty.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I saw her on stage. She's good.
Oh,
She's
good.
a good actress.
Because your reaction when I said her name, you were like, "Oh God, her."
Well, I mean, I think there's some problematic stuff in that area, but I mean, I saw her on stage. That's all I'll say.
Okay. Police had blocked off traffic to the neighborhood while they investigated the crime scenes. So that afternoon, when Morley's wife Valerie returned home, they said, "Sorry, ma'am, you can't come through here. You'll have to turn around."
Yeah.
And she was like, "Oh no, it's fine. I live here. This is my street. Like my house is just right over there." And the officer said, yeah, you definitely can't come through then.
Can't come through here now."
They said, "You'll need to come down to the police station."
Ugh.
So she's sitting in the police station all afternoon wondering what the hell is going on. They still hadn't told her that Morley had been killed. And you know she's got to be on edge because why wouldn't they let her go to her house? Like, she's got to know something is wrong. I just can't, because I think she sat there for like hours before they finally told her.
Anything?
Finally, later in the day, they told her her husband had been murdered. But luckily, the murderer left behind plenty of fingerprints.
Good.
And That told the police a few things.
Okay.
So the day after the murders, at Paramount Studios, security guard Isaac Macias was on duty at the visitor's entrance when a man approached shortly before 12:30 p.m. asking for a female employee. Macias felt that something just wasn't quite right about this guy, like something seemed off. So Macias told him, "Hey, sorry man, I can't let you through." And the man just slowly wandered away. Macias immediately called his boss, security supervisor Craig Phillips, and told him, like, "Hey, you might want to check this out, like, see if you can, see if you can, like, get a better look at him on camera or something." So Phillips adjusted the security cameras. They were focused on this man as he walked along Melrose Avenue. And thankfully, Philip also had the TV on in his office, because just moments later at 12:30 p.m., Police Chief William J. Bratton held a news conference appealing to the public for any help and information that could lead to the arrest of 27-year-old Kevin Lee Graff, Morley and Bob's killer. And they displayed Graff's picture on the screen. Phillips saw this and turned to the security monitor and said, "That's him, that's him." So he calls the police right away, and Graff was apprehended shortly thereafter.
Shit.
Officers found him sitting under a row of ficus trees near Melrose Avenue with a Bible and a can of mace. He was taken into custody before the news conference was even over.
Whoa.
Which is amazing.
That's amazing. That's really fast.
Yeah. So let's talk about this guy. Kevin Lee Graff was from a small town in Oregon called Oregon.
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 Doomed from the start.
But I kind of really like that town name.
Yeah, I can see that.
Dan Huxell, who lived in the town, said that growing up, Graff was one of the best kids there, stating, quote, "He was clean cut and stayed out of trouble."
Mm-hmm.
His parents divorced when he was pretty young, and he lived with his dad, but neighbors said he had a, quote, "solid upbringing." So I guess interpret that how you will.
Sure.
Shortly after high school, Graff joined the Marines as a way to get out of rural Oregon.
Okay.
He was stationed at Camp
Pendleton.
That's it. Which is roughly 82 miles south of Los Angeles.
Okay.
However, he was released on a medical discharge for an injured ankle. And I couldn't find anything stating how long he was in the Marines before being released.
Okay.
But according to Graff's half-brother Jacob, the Marines changed him. Jacob said he was never the same once he was discharged.
That's scary.
It creeps me out, honestly.
Yeah, like when someone goes into Army, Marines, whatever, and then comes out just like a completely changed person.
The thing is, I'm not sure that he was there all that long, and I don't know that he saw any kind of combat.
I was going to say, was he discharged anywhere? Did he see like any wars?
I don't
think so. Okay.
Graff became a transient, living with various friends and acquaintances. Eventually, his family lost track of him. They hadn't heard from him and couldn't get in touch with him, so they reported him missing. He was eventually found by a patrol officer in Merced, California, almost 400 miles away from Camp Pendleton. So how he managed to make his way there, I don't know. But when questioned where he'd been or what he'd been doing, he had nothing to say.
Okay.
He got hooked on drugs, particularly meth, and that will fuck you right up.
That will fuck you right up.
During the summer prior to the murders, he moved in with Jacob, his half-brother. And that July, he called 911 to complain that someone was threatening his girlfriend. He did have girlfriends off and on, but it's unclear if he was even dating anyone at the time that he called. According to police spokesman Steve Mason, Graff was, quote, argumentative, making unclear statements, nervous, and talking rapidly. There were other people there with him saying he had been acting bizarrely. Officers suspected maybe something was going on with him mentally, so they took him in for a psychiatric evaluation.
Good.
Jacob said he had a complete nervous breakdown and was diagnosed as a manic depressive.
Oof.
But he was released from the hospital after just a few days. Then about 6 months later, according to Jacob, Graff's family admitted him to the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Long Beach for observation, but he was released after 10 days. He continued out on his own, eventually finding his way to Las Vegas, where he was arrested for exposing himself to a woman, to which he pleaded guilty. He was arrested in Orange County, California for failing to pay a fine for a carpool violation and had about a half dozen other minor criminal violations. He had a string of jobs. He was a personal trainer at one point. I remember reading he worked at a deli meat counter. And he was a stripper in gay bars and was sometimes a male escort.
Oh, shit.
He claimed he was only, quote, gay for pay, and that he preferred women, which I just thought was interesting since that came up in your last episode.
Right, gay for pay. Also, like, imagine him as your personal trainer.
Imagine him slicing your deli meat.
Ugh, he's probably like, you don't have to do exercise. Just take this, and gives you like a little baggie of meth.
Oh, God.
Lose your teeth and the weight.
Graff didn't seem to know his victims. He just picked these houses
Are you
random.
serious? It was just random?
Random.
Fucking fuck.
His case was delayed for years due to multiple pretrial hearings and changes in representation, but finally, in April of 2008, he was sentenced. He took a plea deal in order to be spared the death penalty, which was good for the victims' families because it meant they didn't have to go through a trial. Jennifer Friedman, one of his attorneys, stated that Graff was, quote, very, very mentally ill and had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. One psychologist said Graff's disorder was brought on by, quote, maternal abandonment and paternal cruelty. Although I don't know what evidence exists to back that up, both his parents were present in the courtroom when he was sentenced. So I don't know what was going on with that home life necessarily.
It's putting blame on people, which absolutely that should happen. And we don't know, of course. But like, I think that also sort of denies the other part of mental illness, that it's like something that's within you.
Sure. And remember, this is like early 2000s.
100%.
This is...
Absolutely. This is exactly how they were looking at it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
At his sentencing, Graff claimed he didn't remember killing the men because he was on drugs at the time, stating, quote, I don't really remember. I don't understand. I don't say I have a mental illness, but apparently I am mentally ill because who in their right mind could do something like this? This person gave me drugs that I didn't know what they were, and then this happened.
Oh, my God.
Then he turned toward the families of Bob and Morley and said he's not a violent person. He said he, quote, does yoga, studies various religions, and tries to focus on positive things and, quote, be the best person I can be. Valerie, Morley's wife, wasn't buying it, saying Graff was aware enough of what he was doing that he locked the door behind him. Remember, after he killed Morley, he locked the door behind him and he drove that Mercedes to where he was staying. So how do you not remember murdering two men, but you remember how to drive to where you're going?
Mm-hmm.
Plus, he had tried to clean himself up after killing Bob. So that shows that he was at least somewhat cognizant of his actions.
Yeah.
And then like the dumping of the shoes, the fact that he stayed at Bob's, tried to clean himself up, and then decided, you know what, I'm not done yet, and killed again.
Oh my God, I can't even.
And Helen, in court, said to him, what happened to you in your short life that made you commit murder?
Mm-hmm.
Graff pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder along with sexual penetration by a foreign object, torture, mayhem, and first-degree residential burglary involving each of the victims. He also admitted the special circumstance allegations of murder involving the infliction of torture and multiple murders. Kevin Lee Graff was sentenced to 2 consecutive life prison terms without the possibility of parole.
Thank God.
I mentioned at the beginning of this episode that cancers are said to have an unusual ability of knowing things without knowing how they know them, like they have a hunch about something. According to Bob's son, Richard, Bob had a premonition from the time he was a young boy that he would die a violent death.
Oh, that's so eerie.
Bob Lees was killed just a month before his 92nd birthday. Helen said, quote, the thing that I miss the most about Bob is the feel of his arms when he hugged me. He had very strong upper arms. Being hugged by him always made me feel safe and protected. Helen died 10 years after Bob in 2014, just shy of her 96th birthday.
Wow.
She donated her body to UCLA Medical School for research and training purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly before she passed, she called up Scott Michaels of the Dearly Departed Tours because she'd heard he'd done a tour around Bob's home and she wanted to know what he said. Like, she wanted to make sure he got the facts straight.
Right.
And she said to Scott, quote, he was very, very handsome. Do you know that part of it? Extraordinarily handsome.
Oh, Helen.
Their phone conversation is available on YouTube, and I'll link it in the show notes.
Yay.
I love hearing her talk. So definitely listen to that because I love hearing her. At the end of his life, a cousin who was visiting Bob asked if she could see anything he'd written. And he said, I have nothing. Well, what about a movie you made? Do you have a video I can watch? And he said, oh, I don't have any of that. And she was like, okay. And he said, actually, here. And he handed her an old, worn piece of paper that had yellowed from age. Mm-hmm. And he said, it's the best thing I ever wrote. And it was the speech he made to the House of Un-American Activities Committee back in 1951.
Oh, wow.
So I'll end with just a bit of his words here. Okay. I'm not going to read the whole speech, but I'm going to read a bit of it. I believe no man who has made writing his profession can completely dissociate himself from people. He writes about them. He writes for them. They are both his inspiration and his audience. Their political freedom guarantees the necessary tools of his trade, freedom of thought and expression. I emphasize this relationship because it explains why I believe a writer must also function as a citizen. Since the death of President Roosevelt, I have felt a growing concern, along with many others, that our subsequent foreign policy has not been successful in achieving the peace the world fought so hard to obtain. I have been concerned with the administration's Get Tough program on one hand, and the fears of my 2 young children who tell me about the atom bomb drills they have been practicing in school. I'm concerned with the loyalty oaths, the thought control, and the endless investigations which have come about because today we must believe that those who were our allies in the last war are now our enemies, and that those who were our enemies are now our friends. I am asked to purge my friends and my conscience under threat of having my 17 years of work and devotion to my craft end in blacklist. When I first decided to make writing my career, I did so because of what I felt about people. I have learned more about people and about writers and the tradition of writing since then. I know that I cannot write that war is preferable to peace, or that bigotry or conformity are virtues, or that one race or one chosen group are superior to any other and can dictate how others should live or how others should think. I cannot, because no man of integrity can successfully write what he doesn't believe.
Wow. That's beautiful.
And that is the life and death of Robert Lees.
What the fuck? He was amazing. Helen was amazing. Kevin Lee Graff, is he dead now?
No, I think he's just sitting in prison.
Good.
Because he was young when
What a fucking psychopath. I've definitely heard of people having drug-induced sort of psychosis where you do this kind of shit. I remember I was watching this woman, I don't remember where it was, but her name was Taylor Shabusiness or something.
Of course.
Crazy. Of course. And she was on meth, I think, or on some kind of drug, and sexually assaulted this guy she was with and then cut his head off and put it in a bucket. Yeah. And
oh my God.
There's police footage of them finding the head in the bucket.
Oh
and
my God.
She had a lawyer and attacked her lawyer in court, and it's a mess. So
wow.
It's scary, right?
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just
because you don't know how your body's going to react to that.
Exactly. And if you just get, he said this guy just gave me something I didn't know what it was.
If we are believing what he said, which I'm sure he was on drugs at the time.
Oh, I'm sure he was on drugs. I don't necessarily think that he was so out of his mind he didn't know what he was doing. I mean, obviously when you're, in some kind of psychotic episode, maybe you don't have an idea of what's happening. But to have those things where you're throwing things away, cleaning yourself off, driving home.
And this was over the course of hours because he went into Bob's house around 5 a.m.
Yeah.
He went into Morley's house around 11 a.m.
So he was, wow.
So this was a long, drawn-out thing.
Right.
So I feel like even if he was on something, wouldn't that wear off at some point?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, how long does that take?
But the fact that he commits one murder, cleans himself up, all of that, and then decides he's going to commit murder again.
It's almost like he liked it the first time.
Yeah.
And he wanted to do it again immediately. I don't like that at all.
Yeah.
What a monster. I'd never heard of this.
I hadn't either. So thank you to the listener who suggested this. You can let us know your comments on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at
Horrorwood Podcast.
You can send us an email at
horrorwoodpodcast@gmail.com.
And if you're feeling a little generous, like Bob.
Mandy. Oh,
I was going to say like Bob was always generous. But But also, like Mandy, our newest Patronian, you can hop on over to Patreon at
patreon.com/horrorwoodpodcast.
Lock your doors, everyone.
Lock them up.
Don't do murder.
Don't do meth.
Don't throw your friends under the bus. Definitely don't do meth.
Stay safe out there, misfits.
Oh, that's so creepy. You have a creepy voice.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's the iced coffee. It grounds me. Grounds me. Get it?
I do get it.
Yikes. Okay.